Welcome to Nobilis Erotica, the best science fiction and fantasy erotica anthology podcast in the known universe. This month's story, a time-crossing tale of gender fuckery. This is episode 459. I am your host, Nobilis Reed. This episode of Nobilis Erotica is sponsored by the generous patronage of Nobilis Erotica listeners. To help out paying the authors and voices that create these stories, visit patreon.com/Nobilis. The July Patron-funded story is Solitaire. Our esteemed author, M. Christian, is an acknowledged master in the field of erotic fiction with an impressive list of awards and publications, including several on this podcast. Our narrator is yours truly. Here we go. Solitaire by M. Christian. An hour or so before the support group meeting was due to start, Zoriana began what they'd finally accepted was going to be their usual internal mental debate before even considering a step outside their apartment. The debate they'd dubbed Measuring by Eyes. The Garden-side Community Center was 12 blocks away. The meeting was at 7 o'clock p.m. It was post-daylight savings time, which meant it would be bright out. Rush hour, at least as much as it ever was in Middletown, Pennsylvania, was usually from 4:30 p.m. to 6 o'clock p.m., which all meant the number of possible eyes was, they thought with a relieved sigh, low. Maybe a dozen or so. Possibly even less. But it was post-daylight savings time, October to be precise, and it was cold, and 12 blocks was a long walk, even when it was warm out. Taking a lift would be much more comfortable, with the added plus of only one other pair of eyes. But as fast as the idea came, it went. 3 months ago, and the memory of the driver's, "What are you?" still made them cry. So at 6:30 p.m., Zoriana put on their heavy black coat, buttoning its thick woolen armor up to their chin, tucking their long and getting longer hair under an equally black knit cap, and hiding their red-painted nails with an even more equally black pair of warm gloves, left their apartment for the first time in a week, and began the 12-block walk to the Garden-side Community Center, shivering with each step, and not just from the cold. They arrived 9 minutes early, which was perfect, as it meant that if there happened to be other people at the center, Zoriana only had to avoid them for that short time. That and the number of eyes they'd counted from leaving their apartment to the center was delightfully scant, and the 6 pairs they had seen, and had more than that had seen Zoriana, had been, with great relief to them, disinterested. Publicly, at least, they had to admit, momentarily souring what had otherwise been that evening's sweet window of optimism. Momentarily, for then it was 7 o'clock p.m., and the doors to the center's meeting room C opened from the inside, and Deborah, the facilitator for the LGBTI support group meeting for Middletown County, was bringing out the battered sandwich board sign welcoming all to attend. With a relieved smile towards her, which was promptly and best of all warmly returned, Zoriana helped her set up chairs, playing another little game in their mind over how many to put out. In the end, they decided on a dozen. Perhaps too many, as attendees for the last several months had hovered around 9 or 10, with a core of 6 or so regulars, but Zoriana allowed themselves a little gift of optimism. By the meeting's formal start, typically 10 or so minutes past the hour to give stragglers a chance to arrive and take their seats, Zoriana saw that their numbers sadly hadn't risen. Though they reminded themselves, they hadn't declined either. "Thank you all for coming," Deborah began when everyone was comfortable, before leading straight into a reading of the prepared statement about the space being a safe one and outlining, even though none of the faces there were new ones and so no doubt already knew all about them, how the mechanics of the support group operated. Head down, Zoriana inspected their nails, having stuffed their black gloves into a coat pocket a few minutes before, trying to become fascinated by how good or how bad a job they'd done in painting them. When it came time for brief introductions, Zoriana's usual nervous stammer was unusually more pronounced, so all they managed to share was their name, punctuated at the end with what they knew was a half-frozen, half-jerky smile. With the smile, Zoriana had lifted their head from their hands and saw that of the 10, one was someone new. They didn't know where they were walking, and best of all, they didn't care. The sun was high, bright, tenderly warm, and when it touched their unashamed skin, it felt to each of them like the landing of sweetly illuminated kisses. Kisses that conjured what must have been the night before, the two of them sitting on the edge of Zoriana's bed, hands in hands, looking into each other's faces, each other's eyes. Each other's welcoming faces, each other's welcoming eyes, mutually sparkling with crisp, bubbling joy as hands caressed hands, exploring contours and textures as if they were the only hands in the world and the universe. Faces, eyes, hands, and both of them moved forward, their sunlight-bright and sunlight-warm breaths tickling cheeks and noses. Lips then coming together with the hint of a touch, a grazing of contact, and with both coming shared, tender giggles and a blushing brief retreat. A brief retreat, as the pull between them quickly came back. Hints and grazes, with a flush of heartbeat-fluttering nervousness, becoming more than hints, more than grazes, much more than hints, much more than grazes, lips to lips, pressing, savoring, tasting, and then yet more happy nervousness, two lips parted, and the electric contact of tongue to tongue. The two of them sitting on the edge of Zoriana's bed. The two of them sitting on the edge of Zoriana's bed and kissing. Hands touching as they did, caressing hands to arms, arms to shoulders, shoulders to necks, necks to faces. The two of them lay on Zoriana's bed. The two of them lay on Zoriana's bed and kissing, kissing and touching, clothing parted, pushed aside to reveal smooth, burning hot skin. Fingers tracing outlines and contours, rubbing here, plucking there, and with each given and taken back and forth, a deep, pure sound brought up from each of them, one after another, and then together. The two of them under the covers, Zoriana's bed, of course, touching and kissing, licking and nibbling, stroking and caressing, with each of everything, finding what found nothing but happiness and heat. Lifted, set free from gravity, the two of them floated high in the sun-bright sky, savoring and relishing everything about each other, everything revealed, everything seen, everything celebrated, everything, best of all, desired. And in the light of that unashamedly bright sun, they held hands, the two of them, together and joyous. And then Zoriana went even higher, became even brighter in that already bright sky, becoming beautifully illuminated and so spectacularly revealed. The meeting ended as usual at 9:00 p.m., with Deborah thanking those in attendance and hoping they would return for the next meeting. Zoriana, who normally lingered at least for a few minutes afterward to put away the chairs they'd helped put out, this time was one of the first to step toward the door, and from there out into the main part of the Gardenside Community Center. Pulling their gloves on, finding the simple action baffling, and so had to try several times before getting their red-painted nails not to catch on the fabric, they lifted their eyes from the frustrating struggle to glance at the other meeting attendees who were dispersing into the center, and from there out into the night. The new person wasn't among them. After finally conquering the gloves, Zoriana adjusted their heavy black coat, their knit cap, and, after looking nervously around one last time, pulled their head tightly down into their chest and left the center, with every step praying that there'd only be a very few eyes from there to the safety of their apartment. Rather than immediately disconnecting from the construct, Magellan remained stretched out on their bed, staring absently up at their own hexagon-patterned panels through the gently wavering superimposition of an acoustic foam-pocked ceiling. Closing their eyes again, they felt the illusion of a pilling, cheap IKEA comforter under their fingers, while a cat box desperately in need of emptying made their nose wrinkle. From the Live Space's kitchen, they could hear Yamaya's late-afternoon pot-and-pan concerto beginning its usual rehearsal, their way of trying to make as little noise as possible instead of making each clash of copper or bang of stainless steel even clearer and well-defined, and never failing to make Magellan smile. Cautiously, the construct's artificial reality still hovering at the edge of their consciousness, they pulled themselves upright, and from there they managed, with somewhat less caution as Magellan found themselves getting more and more used to the distortion, to sit on the edge of the bed. The next step, actually standing up, came easier still, though as they did so they couldn't help but remember an old professor's comment that running a construct, especially one a contemporary person might have little frame of reference with, can often be a disconcerting experience, and one that might take more than a few minutes to recover from. With that professor still in mind, Magellan awarded themselves extra credit for managing not just to stand, but actually walk from the bedroom to the kitchen, while the construct was still actively humming in a portion of their mind. "How does chicken basquets sound?" Yamaya said with a bouncy grin, as they looked up from a steaming cauldron of something on the apartment's tiny stove. "Thought since it's so cold out some spice would be nice." Magellan's finger landed, ladybug on leaf, on Yamaya's nose. At the contact, Yamaya's grin remained, but the bubbly words ended sharply, abruptly. Leaning forward and getting up on slight tiptoes, as Yamaya was around a half a head taller, Magellan touched their forehead to their metamors. At this other contact, a sniplet of data was exchanged, a poem of loving request knitted together in the brief breath of that moment from leaving their bedroom to entering the kitchen. Coming apart, though not by much, Yamaya replaced that touch with reaching down to tenderly hold Magellan's hand. "Indra's awake. Want them to join us?" Magellan nodded, with the rising and falling coming awareness that a tear had left their eye, had begun a salty decline down their cheek. Almost, but not quite wordlessly, they decided on using the living room. Taking the initiative, but only because their unspoken command arrived to their house system slightly before the others, Indra made the sofa elongate, stretch, and flow into a much more accommodating shape. Clothing falling away to make a low hillock of silk and satin, they laid down on the new furniture form, the three spooning together in a well-practiced and always well-loved geometry of chests to backs, arms embracing, groins to acids, legs to legs, breaths against the backs of heads, and drumming hearts and/or pulses felt through the intermixing of limbs and bodies. In it, through it, Yamaya flicked a sub-thought at the knot of them, an idea quickly, casually plucked from their consciousness and transmitted through neural hardware for approval or disapproval. Or the third option, voiced without speaking by Magellan, who responded with the thought form of, "Not quite yet." Sedately, patiently, the knot began to unwind, fingers tracing outlines of skeleton and muscles, exploring the rises and falls of their anatomies, accompanied by the notes, chords, and melodies of giggles, and sometimes even outright laughter. And, from Magellan, another tickling trickle of tears, the salt touches kisses in tenderness by, first, Yamaya, and then, second, by Indra. This, as was so often the case, was bounced and reflected, and so the same from first Indra and then second Yamaya, and so Magellan kissed them away as well. Heartbeats beating together, the three felt their pulses excite, and the kisses went from tears to shoulders, cheeks, chests, and lips. Practiced, familiar, and so very welcomed, they exchanged and shared, beginning without, but then added tongues, then far more heated lips, until those heartbeats didn't just beat together but drummed in thunderous syncopation. Hands, too, continued also with greater pluck and urgency. Magellan seizing Indra's narrow, dramatically planed face to pull them closer, to feast with hungry lips on their closed eyelids, their elegant cheekbones, their delicate nose, and then their equally hungry lips. Yamaya held them both, pressing their sensually vast and superbly plush body against them, feeling their kisses as rippling delights that brought out a deeply tuned laugh of delight. More time, more heat, more steam, and with this all more giggles and smiles. Yamaya, somehow, somewhere, had ended up on their back while Magellan imparted ferocious kisses on them, and Indra administered similarly ferocious kisses between their legs, the action being more than enough to cause their cock to lengthen, thicken, harden, and bob up and down. Below, Yamaya's vagina liquefied and melted, slick fluids painting the delicate outer lips with shimmering rainbows of moisture. To their cock, Indra applied those kissing lips, but with equal affection and delicacy, savoring the outlines and details of the member, so carefully crafted by Indra themselves and presented to Yamaya as a present, and causing their metamor to fill the living room with low howls of pleasure. To their vagina, Indra teased with those exploring fingers, but with similar hunger and near ferocity, sliding one finger and then two in and out of the hot space, also designed as part of the gift to Yamaya, and bringing to the space an additional dimension of happy sounds. The room shook, or at least it felt like it did. Yamaya's twin-organ orgasm was a roar and thunder, a bellow that seemed to bounce Magellan and Indra from the reconfigured sofa and high up into the air. Still more giggles, still more laughter, and Indra seized Magellan around the waist and playfully threw them into a sensually disarrayed collapse of arms and legs, one that gave Indra equal and free access to their own set of genitalia. The summer before, Magellan had decided, to accompany their fervent explorations of the past century, to go old school when it came to their own configuration, working with Indra to create an arrangement that served that passion with their own sexual needs. The result was, as Indra called it, simple but wonderfully effective, a not too long, not too thick, not too ornate cock above a low-dangling pair of testicles. Simple but wonderfully effective, having been exposed in all its erect glory, was immediately seized by Indra, and then was full and completely swallowed with artistic fervor. The jangly tangle of pubic hairs, first tingling their nose and cheeks, and then, on the opposite side of the action, the silken smooth head touching, just barely, the inside enamel of Indra's teeth. To which Magellan bucked their hips again, and with Indra's oral passions, their breath hissing and wheezing out in an opposite side the musical scale to Yamaya's orgasm. Not ever one to simply roll over and slumber, they who just had low howls of pleasure joined in by adding their own lips to Magellan's nipples, using the sensitive pink buds to drive them up and then over and over again, until their hissing and wheezing began to whip and flash around the living room. Panting, chest heaving, Magellan's hands flopped and nearly uselessly clutched at their metamor's arms, chests, legs, and what, blurry with post-orgasm delight, they thought might be arms, chests, and legs. In this, Yamaya sent them, and not just Indra but all of them, a flickering moment of transmitted thought filled with a brief popping image of fireworks. Pulling up and out of their floating delirium, Magellan sent the same as they extricated themselves from the tangle of bodies to be able to better gain access to Indra's body. Magellan took Indra's face, feeding their mouth their still tumescent cock, sliding it eagerly and well-welcomed past hungry lips and back down that hot, tight, moist throat. Yamaya took their chest, kissing, licking with their own mouth, stroking, gently sloping, pinching with their own hands, Indra having years before, opting in good-natured defiance of their own skill in designing them, to go a genital-less route, instead knitting their sexual response, sensory suite, to their entire body. A body that both Yamaya and Magellan knew how to play with happy expertise. Lips and hands, tongues and fingers, old-fashioned cock and artistically configured genitals, inserting, as well as touching, being touched, every other part of everyone else's body. With knowledge accumulated from years and years of practiced bliss, the three worked with loving coordination to summon for Indra a piping, fluted release of joyous sound that seemed, for more than a few of the metamors that afternoon, to hang in the atmosphere of the living room and knitting together the deep tones of Yamaya and the sharp notes of Magellan. And with it, Magellan touched the two others, bringing up with it the recent memory of the suggestion, and, with new tears tumbling down their face, they agreed and opened their minds. Across the world, their pleasure, which was great, and their joy, which was even greater, was there to see, to feel, and more than anything to experience. A burst of those sexual and emotional mutual fireworks put forth to those who wanted, and most of all, who needed it. And as the three snuggled together, a new configuration of their bodies reflecting muscles released, tensions gone, orgasms twitched and sedately receding, they felt the magnificently happy sparks of gratitude from the world beyond their little group, the digitally transmitted thanks of those who'd rode along with them, who'd shared in their happiness, in all its forms. Indra, who'd always been fueled by orgasms, gave their metamors a rain of kisses and a pair of firmly tender hugs, bounced up and out of the living room, sending back to Yamaya and Magellan an image of a humorously laughing falling star, their iconography of appreciation, joy, and love, before vanishing into their studio to put their inspiration to work. Still mixed together on the sofa, both of them finding sleep inescapable after times like this, Yamaya stroked Magellan's cheek, saying, "I know why you did this." "Oh?" licking the tip of Yamaya's nose. "You do you?" Nodding, Yamaya said, "But they weren't real. It's just a personality construct, something put together based on old records." Magellan's eyes filled with heavy tears as their own hand caressed Yamaya's happy face. In their mind, the construct still hummed, suspended in Magellan's memory, both organic and artificial. Magellan imagined Zoriana, measuring the world in eyes, hand forever reaching out to be held, and kissed them, as, in the living room that afternoon, they had also kissed Yamaya. The tears didn't return because they never really stopped. "Because," Magellan softly whispered as they switched off the construct, the impressions fading of that other time, that other person quickly fading, someone like them did exist. And because of them, we exist and are so happy together right now. And that's our story. I narrated this story myself not only because I knew I could do a good job, but I wanted to save up some cash for the big project I have coming up, a story with a massive tentacle orgy written by Bernie Moises, whose stories have graced this podcast on several occasions. This is a two-part story with many, many voices in it, and the best way to do it justice will be as a full cast production. That's going to mean paying a bunch of different people. Your pledge to the Nobilis Erotica Patreon campaign will help to make that happen. Join Michael, Andrew, Gregory, Becky, Cornwall Couple, and Gumby 400 in supporting the Nobilis Erotica Patreon campaign. You have been listening to the Nobilis Erotica podcast. Theme music is composed and performed by Mass Relay. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Until next time, listen hard.